it through. In the end, I gave my life for you. Gave you all I had to give. Found a place for me to rest my head. While I may be undefined, heard this peace just on the other side.
Not that I can, or that I want. Let it burn.
Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today, it's been a few days since I put anything out, and today I have a little thing on the German sabotage program of 1915. And this was a German biological terrorism sabotage campaign, but it wasn't just biological sabotage, it was sabotage in general. So they also used like explosives to bomb places, and they got involved in germ sabotage. So these are some of the early cases, the early instances, at least in the 20th century, on biological weapons back in the days of World War I, which of course I talked about in the first two chapters of my book. The second chapter is where I go into it specifically. I do talk about it a little bit in the first chapter, but that's actually more about the years of like late 1700s into up to World War I. And then the second chapter gets rolling into the German sabotage program of 1915. And I talked about, in that book, I talked about another book called The Fourth Horseman, One Man's Mission to Wage the Great War in America by Robert Koenig. And this was about the story of Anton Dilger. Now, Anton Dilger, that's the guy you see right there. He was the main saboteur in America. He set up a clandestine germ laboratory in the basement of his house, and it was 6 miles from the White House. So in there, he was growing cultures of anthrax. So he was growing anthrax, and he was growing glanders. Glanders is not a bacteria that most people are familiar with, but it was, so back in these times, it was a common horse disease, and of course, humans could get infected too, and it was often a fatal infection. But in the German sabotage program of 1915, they used glanders and anthrax. Now, there were some other things involved, and of course, British intelligence had infiltrated the German sabotage program, and actually, it seems that they were kind of giving it more bang for the buck, and they may have introduced other cultures of different germs and viruses and whatnot. Like in the first chapter, I talk about how British intelligence had infected horses being shipped to Germany with foot and mouth disease virus, and then Germany thought that we had sent them that as an attack. Like they thought it wasn't attacked by America, but it was actually it was actually British intelligence, and they were trying to basically turn Germany against America so that in the years leading up to the war, America would enter on Her Majesty's side. And so there was a lot of this false flag antagonism, you could say, in those critical years before World War One. And why they would do that is because they wanted us, America, British intelligence, they wanted us on their side against Germany. And they got their way. And so I talked about that early in my book, and it's a very interesting story. Instances of bioterrorism in 1915. Most people would find that far-fetched, but actually it was a rather sophisticated program, and they went around basically infecting military and medical horses. And so a lot of people thought that it was just because they were trying to sabotage our horses that were, pulling carts and being used in cavalries. But actually, it's a little more sinister than that, because horses back then were used to turn out serums, and they were also used to make vaccines that would be given to humans. So the serum and the vaccine both would be given to humans, and this takes on a different light, where so they'll be infected with something, and obviously they probably use things that were inapparent, because they would need it to be inapparent so that the people using these horses to make this stuff would not think that there was any disease, that they would not think that the horses were sick or anything like that. So there was a bacteria that I talked about. It was a form of glanders, only in this instance it was more chronic, and it took a long time to actually activate and come online into an active infection. And so it would remain latent for months to years before erupting into an active infection. They called it the Vietnamese time bomb. And they called it that because so this form of glanders, it's generally called melioidosis, and it first shows up in the British controlled areas of I think it was Burma or Rangoon. Well, it was Rangoon, but I think Rangoon is somewhere in Burma or something like that. Somewhere, I know that it was somewhere where the British were in control of. Like, there was a British occupation over there at the time. And that's also where the virulent avian influenza shows up as well, along with showing up in Britain. So it seems like they were out there testing some of these new pathogens back in those early times. I know that the avian influenza, which is called Newcastle disease, that showed up in like the 1920s. I think in like 1928, if my memory serves me correctly, it showed up in the East Indies or something. But so there's this book. This book talks about this germ sabotage program. There's also another one called Dark Invasion, and there's another one I have called The Enemy Within, and that's written by a former British intelligence Secret Service guy named what was his name? Henry Landau, and it was called The Enemy Within. That talks about the German biological sabotage program. And so it was heavily infiltrated by the British, and we know this because there was a guy named Helmut Klotz who wrote or published his personal diaries, and he was talking about how this woman who was working for British intelligence had been put in charge of all their telegrams and such that they were sending their spies in America through their diplomats. And so it was confirmed that British intelligence had infiltrated it, and they were actually kind of helping out the Germans to make the sabotage operations more costly for America, so that it would be a more pronounced effect. So there'd be so they'd be able to sway favor for themselves against Germany in a much better way, which, you know, very Machiavellian, but that's what they did. Okay, so as far as British intelligence penetrating the German biological sabotage aspect, I think it was with this guy, Captain Erich von Steinmetz, who he is very aloof compared to the other saboteurs, and it was very strange, and he had some peculiar germs that the other Germans weren't using. And what is notable is that he was in possession of foot and mouth disease virus, which of course is a virus, you know, commonly found in Britain. And of course, John Loftus had told me that what his sources were telling him was that, so horses that were being sent to Germany by Americans were infected by British intelligence with foot and mouth disease before being sent over, and the Germans thought that it was an attack by the Americans. Well, this guy, Erich von Steinmetz, who I talk about, was in possession of tetanus and foot and mouth disease, and was said to be in possession of some form of glanders, which the only form of glanders that is a little different from it is melioidosis, the one that has a longer incubation period, which they call the Vietnamese time bomb. And so, and what was also interesting about this guy was that instead of traveling through neutral Scandinavia like all the other German saboteurs, this guy travels through enemy territory by way of Russia and Vladivostok, which is like, I think near the Siberian regions or whatever, or closer to, you know, like China and southern Russia. And he travels to San Francisco and then travels all the way across the country, shows up in New Jersey. Oh wait, he started off in Romania and travels in that route that I had just said. Goes through Russia and then to San Francisco and all the way to New Jersey. He shows up at this guy, Walter Scheele's laboratory, who was one of the guys running the sabotage operations, but this guy was not using, his line was supposed to be explosives, not bacteria. And so this guy shows up at his doorstep. He's like, hey, I'm one of the saboteurs, and I got all these germs with me. And Scheele doesn't trust the guy. He listens to him telling him this unusual tale about how he traveled through Russia and all the way. So eventually the guy doesn't trust him enough and tells him to get out, and they have a heated argument, and Walter Scheele pummels this guy, knocks him down, and then throws his suitcase at him, tells him to get out. And so he did. And so this guy was later caught and confessed the details of his operation. And I think he was a British intelligence guy. Either that or maybe even a Russian intelligence guy, but clearly it doesn't seem like he was a German saboteur or it doesn't seem like he was one of the official German saboteurs. So that's why I bring this guy up. So, and so they went around affecting these horses. There's actually a funny story in here where they're talking about them going around jabbing these animals. It's pretty funny, but I'm not going to read that now. But it was I remember reading it to somebody years ago, and we both thought it was really funny. A girl that I was seeing. Okay, well maybe I will read a little part because it is pretty damn funny. So, it's like retelling the story of this guy in the, like, at the stable trying to jab these animals. He goes, it says, carefully, Grant drew closer to the first mule corral. This wasn't a job he wanted to do, but had been well paid, and Felton had said he'd top it the next time if the job was done right. Besides, these were animals, not people. Grant had worked for a few months at a slaughterhouse, and this night duty was nothing compared to the rivers of cattle blood, the gore-splattered tile walls, and the awful stench of death. At the first pen, where the reddish-brown haunch of an animal pressed against a wooden slat, he took a deep breath before jabbing the needle into the thick hide. The animal flinched and brayed, and before Grant could pull out the steel point, the mule turned its neck and came within an inch of biting his rubber-gloved hand. Grant pulled out the needle and ducked out of the way as the animal turned and kicked at the wood slats of the corral. The sudden action in the pen roused the other mules. They began shuffling around, snorting and brushing into one another. The corral's fence shook with all the movement which began to disturb animals in the neighboring pen. Surely, even a drunkard watchman would hear the ruckus. Grabbing the syringe package, Grant crossed the dock to hide in the shadow of a wooden storage shed, his heart racing. He was not a religious man, but he prayed silently that no watchman was close enough to hear the animals' cries of alarm, the whinnies and neighs signaling that danger was near. His first instinct had been to toss the syringes into the river and then lie to his foreman about having finished the job. But Grant, knowing that the boss would be watching, waited until the night guard had passed. Then he came out of the shadows to try again. This time he would first try to soothe the nervous beasts. Then, when they had dropped their guard, he would strike at the nearest animal, jabbing it, and immediately pulling out the needle. Now, that was like, I don't know why it was so funny, but it was. Anyway, so it was a really interesting story. Anton Dilger, of course. So, Anton Dilger, he grew up in Virginia on a farm 6 miles from the White House. His father, Hubert Dilger, who was known as Leather Breeches, was a captain in the Union Army during the Civil War. And I will put some photos on the screen of his father, and then I'll show you what some photos of Anton Dilger, and some pictures of them at their farm. His brother, Carl Dilger, who quit the German sabotage. He was involved at one point, but he kind of quit when the United States declared war on Germany, because if he had gotten caught after they had declared war, he would have been, it would have meant serious crimes. So he quit before that. He quit when they declared war. He said that he would do that too if that happened, and it did. But his brother, he is of German ancestry, right? And he went to medical school over in Germany, and then apparently said that he had witnessed a bombing of a hospital by either it was by the United States or probably Britain, and he thought it was the United States, and so he agreed to offer his services to the Kaiser and to set up this germ laboratory in America at his house when he went back. And so when that hospital or whatever was bombed, apparently he saw children being maimed and killed, and that's what sparked his need for retribution, which, of course, that is understandable in a way, that if you saw something that traumatic, it would generate, I would imagine for any human being, that would generate feelings of resentment. And so he decided he was gonna work for Germany against the United States. And that's what he did, and apparently he was assassinated, or so it was said that he was assassinated, with influenza germs. His brother Carl was certain that he was assassinated in I don't know if it was 1918 or 1917, but he was assassinated, or it is thought he was assassinated. And there were some passages that I talked about that, where I think Henry Landau in his book The Enemy Within talked about how he was assassinated for not carrying out orders in Spain. So he went over to Spain at one point, and yeah, he went over to Spain, and that's where he died, apparently. And it said, where is it? Well, anyway, I don't know where it is, but his brother thought he was assassinated, and Henry Landau also said he was assassinated. So, and this whole German sabotage operation is very relevant when we're talking about the Spanish influenza, which started out in Kansas after a meningococcus vaccine program was initiated by the Rockefeller Institute, and that's where these first cases of the Spanish influenza start showing up, is in this army camp. I think it was called Camp Funston, and it was a month after they did this experimental meningococcus vaccine in all of those army people. And why this is important is because that meningococcus vaccine was made using horse serum. And I'll tell you where that serum was used, because if you look at that actual paper, you're not going to find where it shows that there was indeed horse serum being used. But it's called serum dextrose agar. So it's the medium that the meningococci germs are grown in, and then used as the vaccine. And so infecting these horses with these stealth biological agents seemed to have made the Spanish influenza more costly. It made it mutate more rapidly, because what happens is meningococci have a tendency to suppress the immune system, and when you have a whole bunch of them that just got those shots, right? And then whether this virus came in through there, or whether it was something that was perhaps a latent virus that was already in these people, that the toxic reaction caused it to reactivate, just like Eric Chob's LCM virus reactivated when he injected the foreign protein into the mouse's brain in 1935. And so when people have a suppressed immune system, it causes viruses to reactivate and also to mutate. They mutate rapidly, depending on what kind of virus it is. And of course, the influenza viruses they mutate very rapidly, especially in an instance like that. And now keep in mind, all of these people were also being packed onto ships and sent overseas. So that, because when they arrived over in Europe, it was like dynamite. It just caused an unbelievable amount of destruction, and especially on the Russian side. And apparently the Russian side endured the heaviest fatalities, and because of that, Soviet intelligence actually thought that it was a British biological weapon, and there is actually some evidence to support that, and I talked about that in the second chapter of my book as well. But when we're talking about these horse tissues and horse serum used in that meningococcus vaccine program, so there are some other articles online that talked about that, and what that guy had wrong was there was a guy who had published a bunch of articles about this, saying that the Spanish influenza wasn't a virus but a bacteria, but that's wrong. So, and he thought that the vaccine was just used with different doses of horse serum. That's not what happened, and he's got that wrong. And if you go into that paper, you can see where he got that wrong. But there is actually horse serum used. It's just it's used in an indirect way, and it's through serum, dextrose, agar, the medium that they used to grow the meningococci that was isolated from cases of meningitis. So I want to get that straight, because I think there may be some attempts to say that I've got this wrong, like fact, where they put out those articles, fact check, was this a fact? And they say, because I said horse serum was used to make that vaccine, and it indeed was, but if you looked in that paper, that's not where you're going to find it directly. You have to know more about this serum, dextrose, agar. And I'll put some photos on the screen that show. So it was also called, there was another term for it called New York City agar, and it's used making horse serums, and I'll show on the screen where that is so, and I'll show in that meningococci paper where it says serum, dextrose, agar. Or they may have just used the term dextrose agar, but it's actually called serum, dextrose, agar. So there's that, and I want to get that clear right now, just in case that happens, because most people will be like, I don't see anything where it says horse serum being used. Yeah, it's called serum, dextrose, agar. And that's it. So I think I've covered this biological sabotage, the German biological sabotage of 1915, and perhaps in another video I will talk about those earlier attempts where, starting in the late 1700s, where the British used smallpox, and then they attacked America with contagious bovine pleuropneumonia, which is a mycoplasma, and it was like a livestock disease, and it infected all the livestock on the East Coast. After a British vessel comes into New York, takes one of their cows off the ship, and takes it to a place to trade the cow for a fresh cow, because they said that it had gone dry and didn't have any more milk to give the crewmen, so they traded it for a fresh cow. But the cow they traded was infected with this contagious bovine pleuropneumonia, and it spreads rapidly over the United States after they sailed away. I know, ironically, it was on a ship called the SS George Washington. And so they also did this precisely at the same time to Australia. And what you're going to find in my book is, in these earlier chapters, is that the British often would pull off simultaneous attacks on America and Australia within years apart. So that's it, and I will see you in the next video. And with that said, everybody, take care of yourself, be yourself, build yourself, and I will see you on the other side.
get